Yes, this story is real, and yes, it's about a cat. This cat somehow survived 3 different shipwrecks during World War II. World War II was chaos, a brutal brawl of machines and men. Some of its most terrifying moments played out far from the front lines and out at sea. In freezing waters, under constant threat, submarines lurking below, torpedoes striking without warning, and storms that could tear steel apart. The Atlantic became a graveyard. It swallowed entire ships, and everyone on board, thousands of sailors, vanished beneath the waves, never to be seen again. And in the aftermath of one of the war's most infamous naval battles, that's where our story begins. A clash between the Royal Navy and the terrifying juggernaut of the Nazi fleet, the Bismarck. In the middle of all that wreckage, fire smoldering, bodies still being pulled from sea, they spotted something small. Floating alone, clinging to a piece of debris, a black and white cat. Soaked, unimpressed, and undoubtedly still alive. Kind of like the feline version of Rose from Titanic. He didn't wear a uniform, he didn't belong to any side, but in just a few months, he would become a legend. To understand just how he became a legend, we need to go back to the beginning, to the warship where it all started. The biggest, baddest battleship Germany ever built. A floating fortress made to terrorize the Atlantic. And that ship was the Bismarck. The Bismarck wasn't just a ship, it was Nazis' floating show of strength. Launched in 1939 and deployed in 1941, it was one of the biggest, most heavily armed warships of its time. Over 800 feet long with massive guns and armor designed to shrug off most enemy fire. It was built to cause trouble, specifically by cutting off British supply lines in the Atlantic. And in May of 1941, it slipped out to sea and headed west. The goal was to sink Allied convoys and disappear into the shipping lanes before anyone could stop them. Now, somewhere along the way, probably before departure, someone brought a cat aboard. It wasn't official, his name wasn't on any roster, he was just there, a small black and white cat, likely smuggled in by a sailor, or maybe just a stowaway from the docks. But that's part of the mystery. But it wasn't uncommon for cats to be on ships. In fact, it was quite normal. They kept the rats away, and honestly, sailors liked having them around. And that cat is nameless for now, was just doing what cats do, I'd assume, sleeping near warm pipes, hunting mice, just purring through a war zone. So on May 24th, Bismarck ran into 2 British ships, the HMS Hood and Prince of Wales, and the fight didn't last long. Bismarck fired a few salvos and landed a devastating hit on HMS Hood's ammo supply, and that ship exploded. It broke apart and sank in under 3 minutes, and out of 1,400 souls, only 3 survived.
The ship began to roll over on top of me, and some of the wireless aerials, which were loose, wrapped around my feet and started to pull me down with the ship. I kicked my boots off and surfaced, and realized that I was only about 15 foot away from the ship. She was sinking and had her bows in the air and going down quickly. I'm one of the 3 survivors of HMS Hood, which had a complement of just over 1,400.
After word got back to Britain that Nazis sunk their beloved HMS Hood, Churchill gave the order: sink the Bismarck. Britain made the Bismarck its top priority, and the full force of the Royal Navy was sent after it. At this point, British ships, planes, and intel services go full FBI. They finally find the Bismarck, but she's slippery, zigzagging through the fog, dodging torpedoes, heading towards safety in occupied France. And just when it looks like she might escape, a lucky torpedo from a clunky old biplane jams her rudder. Bismarck can now only sail in circles. She's basically a sitting duck. And 3 days later, in the morning of May 27th, British battleships King George V and Rodney open fire. And it is brutal, shell after shell slamming into the Bismarck. Guns are knocked out, the bridge is obliterated. German sailors try to keep her afloat, but it is hopeless. But she's not going down fast. The crew scuttles the ship to avoid capture. Some say the British torpedoes did her in, others say it was her own men. Either way, she finally sinks. Only 114 souls survived out of more than 2,200 on board. But floating amongst this wreckage was that cat. Can you believe it? As the Bismarck sinks into the cold Atlantic amongst the chaos, there's this cat, and it's rescued by the HMS Cossack. They pull him up from the water, they wrap him in a towel, and give him something to eat. They named him Oscar after the naval signal for man overboard. And just like that, the cat who had started his journey on a doomed German battleship was now sailing with the Royal Navy. Life aboard the HMS Cossack was tight, noisy, and unpredictable. It was a tribal-class destroyer, already battle-tested and well-known in the Royal Navy. And like most warships at that time, it could always use a little morale boost. This half-drowned black and white cat made itself at home, claimed a bunk, and got himself 3 square meals a day. And this stowaway had apparently decided he'd had enough of the losing side. He was proof that survival was possible, that maybe fate wasn't entirely cruel. And hey, if a German ship cat could switch sides and land on his feet, maybe the Cossack thought they could make it through too. You see, the HMS Cossack escorted convoys across the Atlantic, keeping them safe from enemy submarines. For Oscar, it probably wasn't all that different from his time aboard the Bismarck. Fewer guns, different accents, but the same drifting world of metal and ocean. He had warm places to sleep, hands to feed him, and an ever-growing fan base of crew members. But on October 23, 1941, that streak of stability ended. While escorting a convoy near Gibraltar, the Cossack was struck by a torpedo fired from the German submarine U-563. The explosion ripped open the forward section of the ship, killing 159 crew members, including the captain, almost instantly. The damage was catastrophic, but the ship didn't sink immediately. The crew fought to keep her afloat. Some survivors, including Oscar, were transferred to nearby ships, and for 2 days, they tried towing Cossack back to port, but the sea wouldn't cooperate. On October 27th, just 4 days after the attack, HMS Cossack sank west of Gibraltar, and this would be Oscar's second sinking and his second survival. By this point, no one could deny it. That cat had a strange kind of luck. Whether you called it resilience, fate, or great reflex, Oscar had now lived through 2 major shipwrecks, and his story was far from over. After Cossack went down, Oscar spent a short time ashore in Gibraltar, a Royal Navy base at the southern tip of Spain. It was a place to regroup, catch some sun, maybe chase a lizard or 2, and then finally dry off for more than 5 minutes. But the Navy didn't leave him on land for long, because word started to spread about the cat who survived both the Bismarck and Cossack. He wasn't just a lucky mascot anymore, he was becoming a bit of a legend. So when the British air carrier HMS Ark Royal pulled into port and the crew heard there was a black and white cat with a wild story and nowhere to go, they brought him along. The Ark Royal was a huge step up in accommodations. Compared to a destroyer, this was a floating city. The ship had a job to do, ferrying aircraft to Malta, running missions in the Mediterranean. But Oscar, now nicknamed Unsinkable Sam, he seemed unfazed. He found his spots, made his rounds, probably had a few hiding places that no one discovered as well. But of course, this is Sam we're talking about, and wherever he went, the sea seemed to follow with bad intentions. On November 13, 1941, Ark Royal had just finished delivering aircraft to Malta and was heading back toward Gibraltar when a German U-boat, U-81, fired a single torpedo. It struck the carrier on the starboard side near the engine room. The explosion caused major flooding and the engines cut out almost immediately. The ship began to list, alarms now sounding, damage control crews worked around the clock trying to keep her stable. But within hours, it was clear she could not be saved. Unlike the chaos of HMS Cossack, the evacuation from Ark Royal was slow and orderly. Almost all of the nearly 1,500 crew survived. Only one life was lost. But in this organized chaos, Sam was forgotten and left behind, at least at first. When a rescue boat returned to search the wreck, they found him again, clinging to a piece of debris. One of the crew reportedly described him as angry but quite unharmed, which, to be fair, is probably how most people would feel after surviving their 3rd shipwreck in only 6 months. Once again, Sam was taken aboard the HMS Legion, that same ship that had rescued him after Cossack, and brought him to Gibraltar. At this point, no one was joking anymore. They just called him what he clearly was, Unsinkable Sam. 3 ships, 3 disasters and 3 rescues. Any normal creature would have quit the ocean for good at this point, and that's exactly what Sam did. Sam had seen enough action for one lifetime. He had survived 3 warships going down in just 6 months. Statistically, that was already pushing it. Sending him back out to sea would probably tempt fate. So he stayed in Gibraltar for a while. He was given a spot in the office of the governor, not a bad upgrade for a stray, and for a cat who spent most of his years surviving explosions and evacuations, a sunny office with polished floors and no torpedoes must have felt like a luxury hotel. After surviving the Bismarck, Cossack, and the Ark Royal, someone in the Admiralty finally said, "No more." Sam was officially retired from service. They shipped him off to Belfast. How exactly? No one really knows. Maybe by boat, maybe by train, maybe in the warm lap of some officer who thought he deserved a soft landing. Either way, he ended up at the Home for Sailors, a quiet place for old men and apparently one very stubborn cat. And for the first time since anyone had met him, Unsinkable Sam stayed put. He became a fixture there. Sailors who would pass through the home would visit him. Some just wanted to see if the stories were true, and others probably just needed something warm and familiar after what they've been through. He had some odd habits. According to this woman, oddly named Peggy Hill, she said that Sam didn't really care for milk like most cats. He preferred to drink water out of flower vases. Maybe after all that seawater, he developed a peculiar taste. He also was becoming a bit of a celebrity. He was mentioned in the Londonderry Sentinel. A few months later, he appeared on it, or rather meowed, on a BBC Forces radio broadcast. Sam let out a little growl in the microphone. They wrote poems about him. Sailors swore he brought luck, or at the very least, survived it, and wherever he went, people took notice. There was even talk briefly of taking him to America after the war. It didn't happen, maybe because of quarantine rules, or maybe because Sam had finally found his place that felt like home. He lived out the rest of his life there in that quiet home in Belfast. No more battles, no more lifeboats, just a warm chair, some flower water, and the occasional visitor who wanted to meet the cat who refused to go down. Now look, as great as this story is, we've got a lot to talk about, and most of what we've shared here comes from a mix of wartime news reports, naval records, first-hand accounts, and there's no doubt that a cat named Oscar, later called Unsinkable Sam, was pulled from the wreckage of Ark Royal and became a beloved pet of the Royal Navy. That part, solid. But like any good wartime tale that's been passed around a few thousand times, there are a few details that get a little fuzzy. First up, the Bismarck connection. No official German naval records mention a cat on board. No survivor from that sinking ever came forward to say like, "Oh yeah, I served with that cat." No, not a lot of people really survived. So it's entirely possible that that part of the story was added later, especially once Oscar started getting famous after Cossack and Ark Royal. Then there's this photo confusion. I don't know if you've noticed, but there's been a couple different photos of Sam floating around, and not all of them match. One shows a tabby cat, one shows a famous cat, who's actually a completely different cat from a different ship. His name was Simon, and he served on the HMS Amethyst years later. It's possible that parts of Sam's story were polished for print. Perhaps he was only on Cossack and Ark Royal, and someone connected him to Bismarck afterward because, obviously, it would make the story much better. Do you think it really matters? I don't know, it makes for a good story. Whether or not he really survived 3 different sinkings, one thing's for sure. Sam became something sailors needed. Sort of like a symbol. Proof that something, if anything, could make it through all of that. In a war of men and machines, sinking steel and senseless loss, this soaked little black and white stowaway kept popping back up, dripping wet, mildly annoyed, but very much still alive. And that's the part no one really doubts, that this cat was real and that he really survived. And somehow, in his own quiet, unintentional way, he became a legend. He didn't mean to be a legend. He didn't choose the ships, the war, or the stories that followed him from one deck to the next. He was just a cat, nameless at first, apolitical, but in the middle of one of the most brutal and complex conflicts in human history, this little creature became something else entirely. A survivor that people remembered. A symbol of luck, of absurdity, of quiet resilience. Not because he saved anyone, no, not because he fought, but because he stayed alive when everything else went under. And in times like that, I think that was enough. If you like this story and you want to hear more of history's mysteries or other disturbing discoveries, drop it in the comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And until next time, bye!